Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Along this lonely stretch of Highway 16 in northern British Columbia, a chilling mystery unfolds beneath the shadows of thick forests and remote towns, known by many as the Highway of Tears. This road has borne witness to heartbreak and horror for decades. Dramatic aerial visuals sweep over the fog-shrouded landscape, a haunting silence pierced only by the sound of wind and passing vehicles. A solemn voice speaks over these images, guiding viewers into the unsettling reality. Dozens of women and girls, most of them Indigenous, have gone missing or been murdered. Along this route since the 1970s, this is not just a regional tragedy, it is a national crisis. The cases share a pattern of silence, under-investigation, and systemic neglect. Families are left with unanswered questions. Communities grieve with a heavy sense of injustice, and each new disappearance deepens the wound. The issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women is not confined to this single highway, but Highway 16 has become its most haunting symbol. As we begin to explore this story, we do so with empathy and determination to listen, to investigate, and to remember those who are too often forgotten. Highway 16 stretches over 700 kilometers from the coastal city of Prince Rupert to the inland hub of Prince George, winding through dense forests, rugged mountain passes, and small, often isolated communities. A visual map traces this route across northern British Columbia, revealing how remote and expansive this region truly is. The highway cuts through the traditional territories of numerous Indigenous nations, including the Wet'suwet'en, Gitxsan, Carrier-Sakani, and Nisga'a peoples, communities deeply rooted in the land. With rich cultural traditions and histories that predate the highway by thousands of years, despite this deep connection to place, these communities face systemic challenges that have intensified the risks for women and girls living along this route. The lack of affordable and reliable public transportation has long been a critical issue. With no regular bus service and few alternatives, many people, especially young women, are forced to hitchhike to reach school, work, medical appointments, or family. This dependence on hitchhiking creates dangerous situations where the most vulnerable are left exposed to unknown threats on a road that is often desolate for long stretches. The socioeconomic reality of the region further compounds the problem. High rates of unemployment, poverty, and limited access to essential services contribute to a sense of isolation and vulnerability. Indigenous communities have historically been marginalized through colonial policies, residential schools, and systemic racism, leading to intergenerational trauma and mistrust in government institutions. This broader context, geographic, cultural, and economic, helps us understand why Highway 16 has become such a perilous place for Indigenous women, and why these disappearances cannot be viewed as isolated incidents, but as part of a much larger, deeply rooted crisis. The term Highway of Tears emerged in the early 2000s, coined during community-led efforts to raise awareness of the alarming number of Indigenous women and girls who had gone missing or were murdered along Highway 16 and other nearby routes. It was a phrase born out of grief and resistance, meant to capture not only the pain experienced by families, but also the urgent need for justice and change. The name quickly took hold, symbolizing a national crisis that had long been ignored. One of the earliest and most heartbreaking cases was that of Alberta Williams. In 1989, Alberta, a 24-year-old Gitxsan woman, disappeared after a night out with friends in Prince Rupert. Days later, her body was discovered near the Skeena River, not far from the highway. Her murder remains unsolved. News footage from the time and interviews with Alberta's family members reveal years of frustration, unanswered questions, and a justice system that seemed indifferent to their pain. Her sister Claudia Williams would later become one of the strongest voices in the fight for justice, pushing for renewed investigations and public attention. In 1994, 16-year-old Ramona Wilson went missing while hitchhiking to a friend's house in Smithers.
Oh.
Her remains were found nearly a year later in a wooded area near the airport.
Oh.
Her mother, Matilda Wilson, continues to speak out about her daughter's life and the systemic failures that left her case unsolved. Through interviews and photos, see Ramona not just as a victim, but as a vibrant young woman whose life was cut tragically short. The family's enduring grief is matched by their determination to keep her memory alive and to demand answers. Tamara Chipman, a 22-year-old mother and member of the Wet'suwet'en Nation, vanished in 2005 while hitchhiking from Prince Rupert to Terrace, was last seen near Prince Rupert, but her case has never been solved, and her body has never been found. Tamara's disappearance occurred during a time when national awareness of the Highway of Tears was beginning to grow. Her case, like many others, sparked local search efforts, posters, and vigils, but few tangible leads. And then there are the unknowns cases with missing women whose names may never be known to the public, and remains discovered with no identity attached. These silent victims, buried by time and forgotten by official systems, reflect a deeper failure. For every name remembered, there may be others lost in silence. Throughout this segment, we draw on archival footage, family photos, and, where available, interviews with loved ones and news clips that covered the cases. The tone is one of deep respect. Woman's life is honored, not simply as part of a pattern, but as a human being with a story, a family, and a future stolen together. Their stories form a devastating timeline that traces the ongoing tragedy along the Highway of Tears. The tragedy along Highway 16 cannot be fully understood without confronting the systemic issues that have allowed it to persist. The heart of this crisis is a long history of racism and neglect by law enforcement. Families of missing and murdered Indigenous women have repeatedly spoken of being dismissed, ignored, or even blamed when reporting their loved ones missing. In many cases, investigations were delayed or poorly handled, with key leads overlooked, and community input disregarded. This pattern has eroded trust between Indigenous communities and the police, deepening the sense of injustice and abandonment. Experts and Indigenous leaders, such as advocates from the Native Women's Association of Canada, speak to how colonial attitudes continue to shape institutional responses. Many families report feeling that their cases were not treated with the same urgency or seriousness as those involving non-Indigenous victims. This disparity is not just anecdotal, it's reflected in the data and in the consistent failure to solve or even properly investigate numerous cases. Another factor fueling this crisis is the lack of media attention. When an Indigenous woman goes missing, national headlines are rare. Coverage, if it comes at all, is often brief, lacking depth or humanity. This media silence contributes to a public indifference that reinforces the invisibility of these women and girls. In contrast, cases involving white victims often receive immediate, sustained attention. This difference sends a damaging message about whose lives are seen as valuable. Missing infrastructure plays a crucial role as well. In many communities, along Highway 16, there is no public bus service. For decades, residents, particularly women and youth, have had no choice but to hitchhike. This reliance on hitchhiking has created conditions ripe for exploitation and violence. Despite years of advocacy, transportation solutions have been slow and incomplete. With only limited bus routes added recently after immense pressure from community leaders, throughout this segment, we hear from Indigenous leaders, activists, and scholars who have been at the forefront of this fight. Their voices offer both insight and urgency, reminding us that this is not simply a matter of individual tragedy, but a result of deep-rooted, ongoing systemic failure. Until these issues are addressed with honesty and action, the risk will remain in, so will the grief. The investigation into the disappearances and murders along Highway 16 has been marked by controversy, mistrust, and repeated failures, particularly involving the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP.
Yes.
While the RCMP has been the primary law enforcement agency overseeing this vast and remote region, many families and advocates argue that their involvement has too often been defined by inaction, missteps, and systemic bias. For decades, victims' families have described feeling dismissed or disrespected by officers, with reports of missing loved ones not being taken seriously or delayed responses that cost precious time in the early stages of investigations. One of the most high-profile developments in these investigations came with the arrest of serial killer Cody Legabokov in 2010. At just 20 years old, Legabokov was convicted of murdering 4 women in northern British Columbia, including 15-year-old Lauren Leslie, an Indigenous teenager. His case brought national attention to the region and reinforced fears that predatory violence was exploiting the vulnerability of women along isolated routes like Highway 16. However, while Legabokov's crimes were horrific, his capture did not provide closure for most families. In fact, only a small number of cases have ever been linked to known perpetrators, leaving many others unsolved and shrouded in mystery. In response to growing public pressure and decades of advocacy from Indigenous communities, both federal and provincial governments have launched inquiries aimed at addressing the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, MMIWG. One of the most significant was the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, which culminated in 2019 with the release of its final report titled Reclaiming Power in Place. This landmark document, the result of over 2,300 testimonies from survivors, families, and experts, declared the violence against Indigenous women, girls, and 2 LGBTQ+ people a Canadian genocide. The report laid out 231 calls for justice, urging all levels of government, institutions, and society to take meaningful systemic action. Despite the weight of the report, many families and activists argue that government responses have been too slow, underfunded, and inconsistent. Implementation of the calls for justice remains fragmented, and accountability for follow-through is often unclear. Still, the inquiry marked a turning point in national recognition, providing language and structure to what communities have been saying for decades, that these tragedies are not isolated crimes, but the result of deeply rooted colonial and structural violence. Meanwhile, local activism has never stopped. Along Highway 16, grassroots efforts have been vital in maintaining visibility for the issue. Families and community members organize annual memorial walks, awareness marches, and vigils, like the now iconic Walk for Justice and Tears for Justice campaigns. Billboards with the faces of missing women line stretches of the highway, both as public reminders and as calls to action. These acts of remembrance and protest ensure that these women are not forgotten. Even when the legal system fails to deliver answers, equally powerful are the Indigenous-led initiatives creating their own paths toward justice. Organizations like the Highway of Tears Initiative, the Native Women's Association of Canada, and local community safety programs focus on healing, education, and prevention. Many communities have launched their own safety audits, established emergency transportation services, and created culturally grounded support networks for families of the missing. These efforts reflect a fundamental truth that while government action is essential, it is Indigenous leadership that has driven the movement from the start. This segment highlights the resilience and courage of those on the front lines activists, families and leaders who continue to fight not only for justice, but for change. Their work is a testament to collective strength in the face of silence, and a reminder that justice must be rooted in truth, action, and respect. The most powerful voices in this story come from the families, those who have lived through unimaginable loss and still find the strength to speak. Their stories are marked by deep grief, but also by unshakable love, resilience, and determination. These are not just statistics or case files, they are mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends whose absence continues to echo in their communities every day. Matilda Wilson, the mother of 16-year-old Ramona Wilson, has spoken publicly for years about her daughter's disappearance and death. Ramona was bright, creative, and full of dreams when she left home in 1994 and never returned. Matilda's voice often cracks when she speaks about the moment she realized something was wrong, but there's a quiet strength in her commitment to keep Ramona's memory alive. At annual memorial walks in Smithers, Matilda walks alongside other mothers, each carrying a photo of their missing or murdered daughter, bound by shared pain and a collective call for justice. Similarly, the family of Alberta Williams has continued to speak out. Her sister Claudia Williams has become a powerful advocate for justice, appearing in documentaries and news reports to talk not just about Alberta's life, but about the failures of the investigation into her death. Claudia's public testimony. It's not just about her sister, it's about every Indigenous woman whose case was dismissed or forgotten. Her grief has become activism, her sorrow a source of strength, in recent years. There have been some steps forwards, small but meaningful. Changes driven by years of pressure from Indigenous communities, families, and advocates. One of the most tangible developments has been the introduction of new transportation services along Highway 16. In 2017, British Columbia government launched a subsidized bus program to connect remote communities along the route. These BC transit and Northern Health routes aim to reduce the reliance on hitchhiking, offering a safer alternative for those traveling between towns like Smithers, Burns Lake, and Prince George. While not perfect or fully comprehensive, these routes mark a significant shift in acknowledging and addressing one of the core risk factors that has contributed to so many disappearances. Alongside improved transit, community-based safety programs have grown in scope and visibility. Indigenous-led initiatives now focus on education, prevention, and support. Programs like the Highway of Tears initiative offer safety toolkits, awareness campaigns, and culturally relevant workshops aimed at empowering youth and protecting vulnerable individuals. Many First Nations have also established their own safety patrols, crisis response teams, and culturally grounded counseling services. These grassroots efforts often do the work that institutions fail, to offering not just physical safety, but emotional and spiritual support as well. Another important development is the expansion and refinement of missing persons databases. This crisis is not just a story from the past, it is a continuing reality, and every one of us has a role to play. The tragedy of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls demands more than sympathy, calls for awareness, action, and accountability. These women were daughters, mothers, sisters, friends. Their lives mattered. Their stories deserve to be heard. You can help make a difference. Learn more about the issue. Share what you've learned with others. Support Indigenous-led organizations doing vital work on the ground, like the Native Women's Association of Canada, the Highway of Tears Initiative, and the Women's Memorial March. If you have information about a missing person or unresolved case, report it through Canada's National Centre for Missing Persons and Unidentified Remains. Even small details can help bring someone home. You can also donate to local shelters, advocacy groups, or national campaigns dedicated to justice and prevention. And most importantly, listen. Listen to Indigenous voices, believe survivors, and stand in solidarity with the families who continue to fight for justice.